All right, some last-minute Philadelphia Eagles news right before the buzzer as NFL free agency officially begins today with the legal tampering period. Going to be live on Eagles Now starting at 11 a.m. Eastern, and these deals will start flying in at noon. And we've already seen a flurry of moves this morning. Tua Tagovailoa released by the Miami Dolphins. Minkah Fitzpatrick traded from the Dolphins to the New York Jets, and then they give him a 3-year, $40 million contract as a culture setter. So anytime the Eagles make a move this week, I'll be talking about it here on the channel. That's why you hit that subscribe button. I also launched a brand new NFL show, The Chase Down, and I'm 2 episodes in, already north of 1,200 subscribers. So give me a subscribe over there if you want more general NFL content from me. Nothing is changing here on Eagles Now. A little bit sweaty, just got done a run, had a shower quickly. Now I'm walking into work, so walk with me and let's talk some Eagles right now. Let's begin on the A.J. Brown front. So Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network was on air last night, and this is just classic Howie Roseman. And I say this in an affectionate way, in a loving way, in a positive manner. He's an absolute psycho. He's an absolute sicko. What Garafolo said is that a lot of these A.J. Brown trade conversations have started to simmer down and slow down. And a big reason for that is because in conversations that Howie is having with other teams, he is trying to get really creative with working out a deal for A.J. Brown if they decide to move on. And I know a lot of you already are probably saying it's because of the dead cap hit, right? Exactly. So because of the huge dead cap hit, if the Eagles were to trade A.J. Brown pre-June 1, Howie is trying to make multiple trades with the acquiring team for A.J. to spread out the dead money pre-June 1 and post-June 1. The holdup from those other teams that Howie has been negotiating with and talking to is that they're like, hold on, when we make a trade, that trade is going to happen in that moment with one trade. We're not making multiple trades. But Howie has said, look, we're not just going to trade A.J. Brown away for nothing, number one. Number two, it's got to make sense for our football team because of the dead money. And so Howie is trying to get really creative and pull off really a one-of-a-kind maneuver if the Eagles do trade away A.J. by making multiple trades that involve the one player. And of course, Howie's asking price is still pretty steep. 2 first-round picks, reportedly, is what he's asking for. As for Jaylen Phillips, Eagles working really hard to bring him back on a new contract extension. And the number is going to be around $20 million, probably a little bit more, to keep Phillips in an Eagles uniform. And I thought the trade acquisition was a phenomenal move by Howie. It paid huge dividends for the Eagles. They went from being a really good defense to being a great defense with Jaelan Phillips. The run defense got better. The pass rush got better. Average sacks per game increased. He had 41 pressures in 8 games with the Eagles. That is unbelievable production. And the Eagles have been working hard toward trying to get that deal done. And they feel very confident that they're going to be able to sign Jaylen Phillips to a contract. Jeremy Feller had that report the other day that one of the points of emphasis for the Eagles this offseason is to lock up their defensive line for the future. And that includes Jordan Davis, who they just signed to that huge contract, $65 million in guaranteed money, $26 million per year. It includes Jaylen Carter, who I'm going to talk about here in a moment. And that also involves Jaylen Phillips too. In speaking of Jaylen Carter, I want people to do a better job of deciphering whether I say I want a player traded or if I'm just talking about trade possibilities. Please understand that in my job and my role, if a guy like A.J. Brown is involved in trade conversations and I'm at events like the Super Bowl and NFL Combine, surrounded by people who are covering the NFL, involved in the NFL, it is my job to talk about that. A.J. Brown is who I've called the best wide receiver in franchise history. And if he is involved in trade conversations, it is a talking point. So when Jalen Carter pops up as a potential trade option as well for other teams, because according to Jeremy Fowler, teams are calling the Eagles about Jaylen Carter. Yeah, I'm going to talk about it. It doesn't mean that I want Jaylen Carter to get dealt. Jaylen Carter is one of the most talented players in the NFL. He's one of the most disruptive players in the NFL. He can take over games by himself. The Eagles probably don't win the Super Bowl in 2024 if it weren't for what Jaylen Carter did in that game against the Los Angeles Rams, where on that potential game-winning drive for Matthew Stafford and the Rams, he got to Stafford twice and burst through the line of scrimmage, being the disruptive player that he is. And it was that season that Jaylen Carter was a second-team All-Pro. Of course, there have been some immaturity questions, character questions, more so when he was coming out of Georgia. We haven't really heard anything when he's been a pro player. I do think there's a little bit of a red flag here, though, that I want to talk about. And what is that red flag with Jaylen Carter? The Eagles and Howie Roseman, for a very long time, have been very passionate about paying their own players, rewarding their own players. Whether it's homegrown players who are up for a contract extension, Howie and Jeffrey have opened up the checkbook and they've given them huge deals. They are really insistent on rewarding their own. Even some of the free agents who they end up signing, they reward if they feel as though that player outplayed and outperformed that contract. Look no further than Saquon Barkley. He signed a deal coming to the Eagles from the Giants, had maybe the best season all time for a running back, was a pillar for that team that won the Super Bowl. Eagles redid his deal. They gave him the biggest contract ever in the history of the NFL for a running back. Zach Bond. Zach Bond was signed to be a pass rusher, an off-ball linebacker, maybe a special teamer. But Vic Fangio started watching some tape of Bond, talked about this with Howie Roseman. I did. And Zach Bond ended up being an All-Pro in 2024. What did the Eagles do? With Zach Bond, after last year, going into 2025, they gave him a huge contract extension worth $17 million per season. And you look over the course of history with what Howie and Jeffrey have done and how they've handled business, they like to keep their own guys in-house, because when you draft and develop players, it helps you establish a culture. So you look at where the Eagles are right now. They signed Jordan Davis to a contract extension. Now, he's been in the league a year more than Jaylen Carter, but they signed him partially because he's a good guy and they really value him inside the locker room. We don't yet know if the Eagles are shopping Jaylen Carter or if teams are just calling about Jaylen Carter, which would be a natural instinct for teams because they see that Jordan Davis got paid and they're like, okay, let's check in on Jaylen Carter, because do the Eagles plan on paying two defensive tackles nearly a combined $60 million, something in that neighborhood? So if the Eagles are indeed shopping Jaylen Carter, I think it's a red flag, because it means that they don't trust him and their investment in him if they were to give him a long-term deal, which goes against what they've historically done as an organization when they have valued paying and taking care of their own. They, if they are shopping him, again, important to note that, clearly have some concerns about his character, his maturity, maybe his health, or just could flatly come down to trust. So I think that's really interesting, and we'll see what happens. I don't want the Eagles to trade away Jaylen Carter. I think it's really important to have high character guys in your building and in your locker room, but also as part of the makeup of your team, sometimes you need psychos. Sometimes you need dogs. Sometimes you need guys with some edge. Look at Nigel Bradham for that 2017 team. Look at CJ Gardner-Johnson for the 2022 and 2024 teams. I'm thinking back to the early 2000s for some of the guys who the Eagles had who maybe fit the bill of them being a little bit edgy when they were trying to build that culture under Andy Reid. They had a lot of high character guys, but there were some guys with a lot of swagger who, when you look in their eyes, you're like, are you going to punch me in the face? And with Jaylen Carter, like, you never know when he can pop off, but he brings that violence to the football field that I think is very rare. And he is a guy who elevates everybody around him on the defensive line and makes the entire defense better. So I said this yesterday on the show, like, the Eagles have to be careful and they have to tread lightly here for what they decide to do. Do they pay the good guy and the good player in Jordan Davis over the great player who is a little bit rough around the edges in Jaylen Carter? But if they are indeed putting him up for a trade, that should be the siren emoji and an alert for other teams in the NFL that they shouldn't answer that call from Howie, or they shouldn't get in that trade conversation with Howie. Because if the Eagles, who deal with money like it's coming off trees and handing out contract extensions, don't want to pay Jaylen Carter and they don't want to deal with them, that's saying something. And part of the reason why the Eagles were comfortable in taking him out of Georgia when it was a little bit sketchy in 2023 was because they had the locker room culture in place to take a chance on a player like that. Fletcher Cox was still playing. Jason Kelce was still playing. Brandon Graham, Lane Johnson were still there. Darius Slay was a team captain. A.J. Brown was on the team. Jalen Hurts was on the team. So we'll see what happens on that front, but some more thoughts that I had on this Monday morning. All right, congratulations. You walked with me to work. Just wanted to talk some Eagles because the grind never stops. 3-mile run this morning, and we'll be live all day on Eagles Now. When they make a move, I'll discuss it here on the show. But I appreciate you all for watching. If you enjoyed this type of content, type me down in the comments section. If you're still watching, type real one. And I'll catch you soon here in about an hour, live on Eagles Now.